Pleasure today to introduce our speaker today, someone who is the George F. Dales and Barbara A. Dales Professor of Anthropology and also anthropology certificate. Dr. Kenoyer's research interests include the archaeology of early urbanism and state-level society, ancient technology, ornaments, textiles, pottery, lyrics, and literature. He's also involved in ethnoarchaeology, experimental archaeology, and a wide range of archaeometric techniques. His geographic area includes South Asia, particularly India, Pakistan, as well as Southern Bangladesh, West Asia, the Mediterranean, Eastern Asia, China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. He's been excavating and carrying out research on the Indus Civilization since 1975 and has excavated in the space of Harappa, Pakistan since 1956. She has also worked with sites and archaeological projects in India and more recently China and Oman. He has a special interest in ancient technologies, socioeconomic and political organization, as well as religion. These interests have led him to study a broad range of cultural periods in South Asia, as well as other regions. As part of his research on ancient bead technology, he has undertaken studies of collections throughout the world, with a special focus on West Asia, China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia. He was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2011. His publications include monographs on the Indus Civilization, as well as numerous articles, and even a grade on ancient South Asia, and to top that off, a coloring book on Indus cities for children. Now, the coloring allows students to learn about complex archaeological findings in a participatory way. Today, I'm not sure if we'll have that same kind of participation at the end of the talk, but we will have Q&A. His talk today is entitled Changing Perspectives on the Indus Civilization, Recent Archaeological Discoveries in India. Please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Professor Mohenjo. Lights off back there. Is that okay? Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me online? Hopefully everything. It's really great to be back and being able to talk at the center. It's a great to be invited here. Thank you to the director, Professor Viren Murthy, and Sarah Beckham, and Andrea Fowler, and all the staff in the center for arranging these weekly talks. I think it's really important that we continue to maintain our community. Even though some of the funding agencies have tried to pull the funding, we are stronger. We will last. We will be here. We've been here since 1960s as a center, and we will continue. Before beginning, I want to especially thank the Department of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Pakistan, the Department of Culture, Tourism, Antiquities and Archives, Government of Sindh, and the Archaeological Survey of India for their support in working in both countries, as well as the Ministry of Heritage and Culture in Oman. I also want to thank all the team members from this Harappa project, which I had run since 1985, and the Pakistan-US team that we have been working with now in Allahdino and Mohenjo Daro, and now we're going to be starting to work at Harappa together. Also, numerous colleagues and students for sharing data and information, and lots of funding agencies over the years. I especially want to thank SEAS, Sindh Exploration and Adventure Society, which has been established by Dr. Kalimullah Lashari and Asma Ibrahim, for putting forward the proposals and getting the license to excavate in these sites, because it's from their efforts that we've been able to actually begin working in these areas. And Asma is the one in the center in the bottom here. And Kalimullah, I don't know if I have a picture of him, but Ali Lashari, his son, is there in the center. And he was the one who kind of made sure that we could excavate at Mohenjo Daro. There are lots of other people. I can't mention all of them, but it's really without their support, I wouldn't be able to present what I'm doing today. So Recent discoveries, this talk is about new ways to look at the Indus Valley, because I've talked here for the last 40 years, given different presentations, and things change. And one thing we learn in archaeology is that when you get new dates, you got to report it quickly. You've got to change all your models. You've got to change some of your interpretations. And so just before I left for the field, a new publication come out, which I knew about for the last 7 years, but they couldn't publish it, so I couldn't say anything. But finally it got published, and now we have to revise a lot of things. So we're going to talk about that. There's other things relating to the origins, which we'll talk about. That's what I was working at Mohenjo Daro for. And the eventual decline and transformation of the Indus Civilization in different regions. This original chart that I made many years ago still works. Even though the changes have happened in some chronologies, it's still there. It's still basically the framework, but there are minor details that we need to modify. And they relate to the early foundations of settled communities in South Asia. We know that people have been living in South Asia since plus 2 million years ago. And these communities have been there in continuity. There may have been people coming in and out, but those communities have been there for a long time. We know that the beginnings of food production began in Afghanistan and other areas by about 9,000 or 8,000 BC. But now we have to redate that in the Indus Valley at the site of Mehrgarh. There's one site that was excavated. The director of that site used to claim that it started at 7,000, and now because of the redating, it is only now we can say that it's around 5,000. So the site of Mehrgarh we have to redate, but that doesn't change the fact that Afghanistan has early dates and Central Asia has early dates. So basically, the overall framework, in my opinion, doesn't change that much, but the site of Mehrgarh does. So Mehrgarh is very important because the excavations at Mehrgarh changed everybody's perspective about how South Asia was playing in the picture of the early development of civilizations. And we know from the study of materials that I did for my dissertation and for later studies by other people that Mehrgarh was connected through long distance trade networks to Central Asia, to possibly Oman, to Iran, to parts of the Indus Valley, which led to long distance movement of people. And the movement of people is also accompanied with the movement of genes. So you can't have rocks moving places without genes moving places. So that means that people are interacting and exchanging both their genetic material as well as material culture. The site of Mehrgarh, they started excavations in 1974. They tried to date the site with using traditional carbon-14 dating, but the presence of bitumen in many of the burials and the presence of lots of things that would distort it led to lots of distorted dates. The site has a mound of 10 meters that had many burials in all the different layers. And Jarij argued that there's no way that that 10 meters happened in a short period of time. So based on the size of the mound, he thought that the dates that were wrong, that were at a certain period were wrong, and that the ones that were a bit older were right. So he claimed that the site started at 7,000 and went to 5,000, so 3,000 years of development. Now we know that that development happened much more rapidly, and it happened within at least 500 years. So this was the result of annual floods, which happened today in Pakistan as well. People abandoning the site, coming back, burying their dead, living there, another flood. And this happened so rapidly that you have this massive 10-meter buildup. So you can go read the article, which is very complicated, but it dates to between now 5,000 plus to about 4,500 BC for those layers, which we used to think were from 7,000. And when it came out, everybody got all upset, but I looked at the data more carefully, and actually, just because Mehrgarh changed doesn't mean that the sites in Afghanistan changed. So we may find another site near Mehrgarh that is earlier, and we have not excavated all the sites in this region. So the site of Mehrgarh does not have pottery at this period. It's a pre-ceramic Neolithic site, and burials were found. So the dating, just to help you understand the process, was done by taking carbonates from the teeth of these individuals and redating the carbonates which is a microscopic level, and then using statistics to figure out ways to enhance the dating. And they redated 23 burials. So they actually dated the people. They didn't date the charcoal. They didn't date the artifacts. They dated the actual people. And the pattern is very irregular, showing earlier levels have earlier dates, later levels have later dates. So it's really no question that the dates have to be revised. And the presence of bitumen is what had thought they had caused the sequence of the earlier dates to be inaccurate. But actually, some of those early carbon dates were actually spot on for what was happening at this site. But this doesn't change the importance of Mehrgarh as an indication of indigenous populations. The article itself suggests that a lot of the early domesticates came from the Near East. I do not agree with that, and I will say that publicly here. These communities are indigenous. They did not come from the Near East. And we know that because physical anthropologists 40 years ago studied the teeth, and the teeth from the burials of Mehrgarh that now have been redated all fall within what's called a Sunda Daunt population. In the green there are the Sunda Daunt population. Mehrgarh is the easternmost or the westernmost distribution. It extends all the way through Southeast Asia. And then you have Sinodont, which is in the north, which is in East Asia and Northern Asia. So the people in those burials that are dated to this time period are clearly, based on the physical anthropological data, people from Asia. They did not come from anywhere else. They are part of an Asian population. Most recently, a DNA analysis has resulted in one fragmentary DNA from a woman, female of the Harappan period, much later. And their analysis, through various statistical manipulations, indicates that that population represented by that one female DNA also separated out from other populations of the Near East at more than 12,000 years ago. So I'm sorry this keeps flashing on and off, but you just have to deal with it. So 12,000 years ago, the populations that developed in the Near East separated from the populations that were developing in South Asia. And this is confirmed now with that one DNA fragment, which supports the evidence from the Sunda Daunt population that we see from the physical anthropologists. We need more DNA. We don't have very many burials. The burials at Mehrgarh also have artifacts that tell us a lot more about what's going on than just, fragments of bones. One of the burials of a young child had a large bracelet, bangle, made of a conch shell. This conch shell is what I did my dissertation on. So I studied these materials back in 1983 and documented them. So this is an example of a specific species of shell only found in South Asian waters. So knowing that this is a local species, we know where the shell can be found and how it can be made. You can make one big bangle out of one shell. Later excavations by the same different French team found burials in Baluchistan, which is another part of the region of Pakistan. I'll show you on a map, with women bearing two bangles, but they're slightly different shape. They have a gauntlet shape, also made with one shell at a time. So these are very distinctive because when I did my dissertation, I found a fragment of one of these at Harappa. But when I found it, they had not excavated these burials. So I didn't know that this was a part of a repaired gauntlet bangle that dated to about 35 to 4000 BC. Now I can say that that bangle fragment found at Harappa, which was just found in the excavations and not reported where we don't know where it came from, was actually the remnant of a very early bangle that had been brought to Harappa by somebody, probably a woman. Women in Tibet still wear those bangles, okay, in Eastern Tibet. They use them and they're part of their cultural identity. So that style has a very long history in South Asia. Somewhat later burials from the same cemetery, Shahi Tump, show women wearing different bangles that have grooves in them. So they cut off the flange, and they started making grooves. And in studies of ethnographic bangles, those grooves are often used to put wire of copper or gold or silver in. That way they're more decorated. Those bangles have been found in Gujarat, which is in the bottom, and then they also are found in Tibet. So those types of bangles are also have a broad use and always worn by women. And then there was a discovery in Tajikistan. They found a couple burials, and one of them was a woman, and she was called the Princess of Sarazm, and she had two bangles, similar to the ones found in Shahi Tomb, but she was discovered before the Shahi Tomb burials, so they didn't really link it to her, to that region. And she was also buried with lots of other ornaments. The pottery analysis of her pottery showed that she was a local, had pottery from the local traditions, but she was buried with lots of carnelian beads, and that carnelian possibly comes from the Indus Valley, and possibly the steatite beads may come from the Indus Valley. In the recent DNA studies, they analyzed her DNA, and her DNA shows 20% Harappan, meaning South Asian, admixture. So this is a woman buried in Tajikistan who's wearing Indus-style ornaments or ornaments from the Indus Valley, 1,500 kilometers from the source of those materials, and lots of jewelry that might relate to the Indus Valley. The fact that she has only 20% DNA relating to South Asia could be because she's the second generation. So maybe her mother came to this region or somehow moved into this area and she inherited these bangles from her mother. We don't know. But that's an important piece of the puzzle that we're trying to understand. And then just in 2020, during COVID, my colleague Rajesh began excavating sites in Gujarat, which had never been studied before, and they were discovered when they did some surveys. This is a site called Juna Katia, and Juna Katia means just old Katia place. And they found burials, and in those burials, it's dated to around 3200, so about the same time as the stuff in Shahi Tomb. Those burials have wide bangles identical to the ones found in Shahi Tomb. Juna Katia is located right next to the areas where the shell is found in the Gulf of Kutch. So this is where those shells were probably being collected from the sea, made into ornaments, and then traded on to the Indus Valley and up into the mountains. In Juna Katia, they have some burials with lots of thin bangles and some burials with wide bangles. So it shows a diversity of ornament tradition, which had never been documented before. And these burials date before the beginning of the Indus Civilization. So Indus Civilization burials, many of the women have thin bangles on their wrists. None of the women have wide bangles. So this is a change of pattern that happens in a later time. And then we go back to Harappa. So we're looking at the Harappa material where we've excavated all these levels from the very origins of the site. And in the beginning of the site, I have wide bangles of shell and thin bangles of shell, showing that the same patterns are found in this far inland area. And the only way these bangles could get there is if they're connected to Gujarat or to the coast near Karachi. So how would people in Harappa, or why would people in Harappa wear shell bangles? They can get it by trade, or maybe they got it through marriage and women moved from one area to the other. And I'm emphasizing the role of women here because in the past, most people, when they talk about migration and movement of communities, they say it's the men. Men go into an area, they marry locally, they start dominating. And I think that that needs to be revised and probably thrown away, because this use of bangles indicates that women may have had a much bigger role and movement from one area to the other. They weren't as sedentary as we think in the past. So we have the gauntlet bangle from Harappa that may date probably 4000 BC. We have the wide and thin bangles that may date to about 3000 BC. That links to the earliest levels at the site of Harappa. So now here you have the map. Okay? All the different places where these bangles come together show the amount of movements and interaction across a region that in the past, people like to draw arrows from one area to the other. And usually those arrows are drawn from west to east. And I disagree with that. I think that we have to understand that if an arrow can go from west to east, it can go from east to west, it can go from south to north. And this whole region was involved in multi-directional interactions of people, gene flow, ideas flow, and ornament traditions that were developing and becoming part of their identity. So Harappa is an area where we've been able to investigate this trajectory and see the development of early urbanism. And we've been able to see the development of writing and seals and weights. And at Harappa, we see the early settlement becoming walled and then walls being built around it. And then the later settlement and the later urban phase, walls being built around the city. So this process we can confirm is a long trajectory of urban development, starting from a small village to eventually a walled village to eventually a walled city. And I've talked about Harappa before, and I'm not going to talk about it again now. I just wanted to remind people of the importance of Harappa as a model for the origins of Indus cities. Harappa also had connections to the south. They got their carnelian from Gujarat. They got some of their rocks from the Sindh. And the place that they got some of their stone tools from is located near the site of Mohenjo Daro. So Mohenjo Daro is the big city in the south that had been excavated multiple times, but they couldn't get to the lowest levels because of the high water table. So Mohenjo Daro we wanted to investigate the origins of the urbanism at Mohenjo Daro through new excavations at this site. This is Mohenjo Daro. So it's a huge mounded city, has north, south, east, west streets, brick buildings, large remnants of what have been identified as city walls. It continued to be inhabited. It was never abandoned. People talk about the abandonment of Indus cities, but that's totally false. People lived here until the 4th century AD. They built a stupa on top of this mound because it was important. So the idea that Harappan cities were suddenly abandoned at a certain point in history is all absolutely wrong. We have to understand that things changed. People did move around, but these cities were not totally abandoned. So the stupa, don't pay attention to the stupa on top of there, because I'm not going to talk about the stupa in the Buddhist period. I'm going to talk about the city wall, which is the remnant here in the front. Wheeler, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, the famous archaeologist from England, came to India before partition and began reorganizing the Department of Archaeology. He was then invited to Pakistan after 1947 to help train Pakistani archaeologists, and he excavated at Mohenjo Daro. When he excavated at Mohenjo Daro, he dug in several different places. He drew a map. He tried to identify what the city was like. Wheeler's map is on the left, very simplified, and it's not very accurate at all. This is a map that was done by the German team, and then I drew little circles around it, which I argue are separate mounded areas that would have probably been walled and represent different neighborhoods of the city. My professor, George Dales, Wheeler excavated one part and went as deep as he could. He didn't study the material, somebody else did. I published it later on, but that lowest levels had pottery that showed that this was an early occupation before the beginning of the Indus Civilization, which we call Kot Diji. So that pottery can be identified by its shape, by its color, by its texture. And we know where it came from. And it's in a drawing here on the side. You can see the early layers are down here in the very bottom. That's now covered with water. My professor, George Dales, excavated in this area, and he also did corings. And his corings, he saved the pottery, he made a note of it, and then he put it in a box, and I could never find it. After he died, his pottery got shipped, or stuff got shipped to Harvard. I was in Harvard looking in Richard Meadows' office, and I saw a box saying Harappa core, Mohenjo Daro cores. I said, "What are you doing with that?" He said, "Well, it came from Dales's house after he died." I looked through it, and there was pottery from these corings. After studying the pottery, I found early Harappan pottery in the cores that Dales did. So now we know that there's early Harappan pre-urban settlement in this area and pre-urban settlement in that area. That's all the information I had. With that information, I went to my colleagues at SEAS and said, "We've got to do some more excavation at Mohenjo Daro. We've got to go back and start doing this. We can't just look at the surface anymore." So this is what Wheeler had excavated and left. He left it open. He never filled his trenches in, and it's all badly eroded. This is what it looks like today. No conservation. And we decided we were going to try to find his trench and re-excavate the edge of his trench and trace his levels and see if we could find those early levels. So this is the area we decided to excavate. and with a team, we went there and we started laying out trenches. And the first trench we laid out, we found lots of debris from later erosion. We found some conservation stuff that they'd built a paving, and we didn't find his trench. So his trench got so badly eroded that we had to make a new trench further to the south. And when we dug that trench, we found more conservation material just right under the surface. But underneath that, just underneath that, we found the city wall. So the wall that he had found, but he never properly studied and excavated. So this is the team when we discovered the wall, we cleared it. And after making a drawing, you can see the mud bricks that are formed as a part of a city wall. This goes around the entire mount. It's not a platform on which people built houses. It was built as a encompassing wall around the city. It had an addition on the outside, which is here. So this is a cross section showing the one part of the wall and the addition here. And we can say that it's about 6.5 meters wide at the top, but at the bottom, it's going to be much wider. So we haven't gotten to the bottom yet. And this is a really important discovery because we can identify the period of time that these were built, which was during the Harappan phase. And then we can see when it was eroded. This is a top view of the wall and the four trenches that we did at Mohenjo Daro. We did a cross section connecting Wheeler's Trench to this new trench that we did so we could identify and correlate the layers, because all of his plans and all of his drawings are lost. We don't have them. So you'd think the leader of stratigraphic archaeology would have done something with his material, but we can't find it. So this is a view of what Wheeler dug, what we did, and we're trying to reach these layers down here. So we just got to the surface. We just got the top of this wall, and you can see that there are multiple walls built here. And we need to go down about 4 or 5 more meters to get to these layers, which are actually underwater. So we're going to be coring, and we're going to try to get the carbon from cores taken down to that layer to get dates from the earliest time period. And that will help us date the origins of the city and the development of the city and confirm what we had argued before, and I've argued in various publications, that multiple regional urban centers emerged out of early villages, building communities and dominating certain regions of the landscape. And together, the integration of all those communities led to the emergence of what we call the Indus tradition, the Indus civilization. I've colored these areas in kind of different colors, starting with the Sindh in the south and central Punjab, northern Punjab, eastern, western, Gujarat, even Oman and Makran. These are all areas that contributed to the development of the Indus civilization. That civilization I've talked about in the past. I'm not going to go into details. We have dominant cities. We have writing, which still is undeciphered. We're working on that, trying to do studies of the seals and materials. And we know that Indus cities were heterogeneous and hierarchically organized to integrate communities from many different parts of the Indus region. And that this process began long before what we normally thought of as the urban phase. So instead of starting at 2600, it began actually 2800, 200 years earlier. And this is a really important confirmation that we knew at Harappa, and now we can say is happening at Mohenjo Daro. These multiple walled areas are also a unique way of organizing a city. So these walls were not used for defense. They may have protected the city, but they were used mainly to control economics. And you have economic control in different sectors that were then competing with each other and building large infrastructures that were trading across the region. So we have a pretty good idea about the urban centers. I've talked about them before, but we also wanted to investigate one of the small rural centers, which had not been properly documented and published by an earlier scholar. So the site of Allahdino is where we were excavating on the coast, and near the coast, near Karachi, and it's located just near the Karachi airport. But it was in the past right on the delta, right on the edge of the Indus Delta, where settlements had access to the sea. Allahdino was excavated by Walter Fairservice. He was a professor from Vassar College on the East Coast. He would go in the summer, take a small team, and they would excavate, and then he would go back and teach and do other things. He never published all of his material. He had a nice drawing with all the areas where all the different seals are found. So all the different seals, he located where each seal was found in the houses of Allahdino. And he found in one room a hoard of jewelry. Something wrong with this point, sorry. So this room in the very south, you can see jewelry hoard, had what was the most amazing hoard of jewelry, which I got to study because I was going to bring it to the States for research and never brought it, but I got to study it in Pakistan and I'm still studying it. It's filled with silver and gold and carnelian beads and copper beads, all stuffed in a little jar and buried under a floor. And we never knew why this small little settlement, 1 hectare in area, had a kind of hoard that was identical to those found in the big cities. So we have a hoard like this in Harappa. We have one in Mohenjo Daro. And in this small little town or village, way out in the middle of nowhere, you have another one. So why is it there? And we needed to figure out the date of when this was happening and when it was buried. And so we wanted to go back and research this site. So I got C's to help me get the license, and we got permission to go and re-excavate Allahdino. And I had visited the site many times when I was a student and over the years going to Karachi. And you could see the exposed archaeology of what he left. He never filled his trenches in either, just left them and walked away. After getting a license, I said, well, we should look at Google Earth photos and see what's happening at the site. So in 2005, you can go on Google Earth and you can move the thing and say, take pictures from different time periods. So when I went to the site and got the first Google Earth, I found a huge water tank built right in the middle of the site. I said, when did that happen? So by looking at the Google Earth images, I could see that it started in 2019, and then they slowly built it, and then it was kind of formalized by 2020. 2005 was the last one that I found that had the excavation trenches, which you can still see the outline of. So I was very discouraged. The site had been possibly destroyed. But we went there, we started digging, and we found that even though the tank is built there, and when they built the tank, they took the dirt and they covered all of the site and filled up all those trenches. So the rest of the site is actually preserved, and areas of the site that had not been excavated by Forest Service were accessible. So we began excavation. We've had 4 seasons there now. And the team that I've trained in Pakistan, plus my colleagues from the US, are helping to re-examine and understand what a regional settlement would be like in Sindh, which has never been studied before. And we have mud brick houses, which you can see outlined here, and the discovery of lots of different types of artifacts, which we haven't found another hoard, which I doubt we will find, but hopefully we can find some more seals. And we found lots of evidence for manufacture of shell ornaments and the use of dentalium beads and copper objects and other types of material that we can start to link between other areas of the Indus region. So those are some of the important discoveries, and we'll talk more about these at the South Asia conference. So I'm just giving you a highlight of the iceberg. There a lot more will be presented at the South Asia conference coming up. The carnelian beads in that hoard are also part of what I've been studying. And so some of the recent analysis that I've done is to try to understand where those carnelian beads came from and how they were traded across the Indus Valley. Harappans like beads. I've talked about beads in other lectures. I'm not going to go into all the beads, but we have now studied carnelian from a vast area of Asia and West Asia and North Africa. Randall Law, Laura Dusubio, and myself and my colleagues have collected carnelian from different geological sources. We've analyzed it using laser ICP-MS, so we have a chemical signature, and then we can test actual archaeological beads against this source area. And I'm working now with people in Beijing to do stuff from China as well. So we have a huge database in Beijing and Thailand and now in the Indus Valley. So from Harappa, we've been able to show that carnelian beads found at Harappa come from many different regions. We can trace where they came from, and we can identify the sources of that carnelian. Some of it's from Iran, some of it's from Eastern India, some of it's from Western India. We've also done that with beads from Oman. So in Oman, we have carnelian beads that we can now show came from Iran, some from South Asia. And through these studies, we can get a better idea of the interconnections during the Harappan period of movements of material across the landscape. So this is an example just of the carnelian flow between Indus Valley. Indus people were also getting from Iran, so then it was going to Oman, and there's a lot of different networks that were happening in this region. Through the study of morphology, I was in the Mediterranean studying in Crete, and this is based on research that my student, Jeffrey Ludwig, did for his dissertation. Now I've gone and helped create a larger database. We can trace Indus beads by their shape. I haven't analyzed them because nobody will let me drill a hole in them, but just looking at the shape, I can say these are from the Indus Valley. And Jeffrey Ludwig and I published an article that's showing the distribution. And I went back this year and studied more stuff. So I got to Egypt, and guess what? Last time I went to Egypt, they wouldn't let me take any pictures in any museum, but now you can go and they let me take pictures because everybody has a phone and everybody's taking selfies. So I was able to take pictures of beads that I had seen before, but I couldn't document. So those long carnelian beads in that belt from a burial are probably from the Indus, and I'm hoping to go back and study them in the near future. And then we have Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamian material is also very important because it shows the presence of carnelian that looks like Indus carnelian. And fortunately, this necklace in the center is in the Field Museum in Chicago. And my colleague, Laura Dusubio, analyzed the carnelian, and that carnelian from that necklace of a woman buried in the Tish Cemetery, all of the carnelian comes from the Indus Valley. So now we know that another woman wearing carnelian beads from the Indus Valley is found in Mesopotamia. We don't know her DNA. Nobody studied her skeleton. We just have her necklace. I have a feeling she's probably related in some way to traders or people from the Indus Valley because all of her jewelry is linked to that region. We can analyze the carnelian. We analyzed it. It all sources to Western India. So this is clearly indication that the carnelian source comes from there. But when I studied the beads, I found that some of the beads have characteristics of manufacture that is identical to Indus beads, meaning properly made, properly ground, properly shaped, and others would probably not pass muster in an Indus workshop, meaning an Indus master craftsman would probably knock somebody over the head for not polishing the end of a bead. But in Mesopotamia, they were using Indus technology, probably Indus trained craftspeople, but they didn't have the same rigor in their workshops to make things exactly the same way. So I argue that these beads, the bottom one, for example, was made in Mesopotamia using South Asian material, using Indus technology, but not the quality of manufacture that we see in the Indus. And this suggests that Indus craftspeople were traveling as well, not just women, not just elites, but also craftspeople coming to Mesopotamia and living in cities and working and becoming part of those communities. And we do have textual evidence for this, so I won't go into that, but there's indication that people from this region were present in Mesopotamia. So to conclude, we have beads studies confirm the presence of more complex exchange systems at a later time. I talked about the shell from an earlier time, and now we have ways to think about movements across this region that have been started in probably the Neolithic period at 5000 BC, or maybe earlier, 7000, and continued on through the Indus period of populations moving back and forth and interactions across this area. I will be presenting more of this at the South Asia Conference. I encourage you all to go, and there will be lots of papers, 3 days of archaeological papers, many of them focusing on material from our recent excavations. And we are going to start excavating in Mohenjo Daro in December, and maybe Allahdino, and then Harappa, and then through the summer. So stay in touch. I will keep you updated. We will be putting this up on the website, and we're publishing it as well. But I just want to say that it's really exciting to be working on this material with my colleagues in Pakistan and some of my students here. Lucas Wirik was with me at Mohenjo Daro, and he went to Harappa and to Allahdino, and Randall Law was there, and hopefully more people can come and join me. Thank you very much.